Thank you all for participating in this Zikaron BaSalon in commemoration of Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Remembrance Day. And I want to extend particularly a warm welcome to the Shinshanim, the young ambassadors from Israel who are here for the summer. You and your colleagues from many past years have made such a profound impact on so many young Canadians. Thank you. Enjoy your summer in Canada and spread your newfound lessons when you return to Israel. I want to make a comment about the water that you see behind me. This is not my private swimming pool. It happens to be the Mediterranean Sea, Yam Atichon, which we stopped to have dinner in 2019 on our way from the Galil to the Ben Gurion airport. When I arrived there, I saw the most beautiful sunset, so I felt that I wanted to take a photo of it, and that has become my background. Unfortunately, today is a very, very emotional day as I watched the March of the Living at Auschwitz-Birkenau this morning. And many of my tears that I shed during the day have raised the water level of the Mediterranean quite a bit. 5 years ago, I was invited to speak about the Holocaust at a Hillel-sponsored evening at the University of Toronto. I began my remarks with a quote from the great Rabbi Hillel, "Im lo achshav eimatai," if not now, when? So I must speak now because I am one of a diminishing group of Holocaust survivors, and my future is much shorter than my past. There was a heartbreaking report from Israel that in the past 3 years, about 47,000 survivors have passed away. And this does not include other countries. These are just the statistics that are kept by Yad Vashem in Israel. But this morning, I happened to see a heartbreaking article in the New York Times. There were about 10,000 Holocaust survivors in Ukraine. Some have been killed during the current barbaric attack by Russia. It's ironic that they were saved by the Russian armies during World War II from the Nazis and are now being killed by the nation that saved them. There's an urgent effort to evacuate as many survivors as possible to Germany. 78 so far, and others soon to be, are being evacuated. Some, unfortunately, refused to go to Germany because of what had happened from some of the perpetrators from Germany during the Shoah. 5 years ago, I was invited to speak at the I'm sorry, I've said that. The reality is that you, particularly the students, are the last generation that will be in the presence of Holocaust survivors and hear their testimony. In fact, currently, there are only 12 survivors in the Greater Toronto area who participate in person in events such as this. Your children will not have the same opportunities. I want to share with you what my mission in life has become. It's to promote Holocaust education and genocide awareness, to challenge Holocaust deniers, to inspire Jews and non-Jews alike to become new witnesses, to oppose hatred, anti-Semitism, racism, and discrimination of any kind, to seek and not be afraid of truth, to speak out, to not be indifferent bystanders, and to make a difference, and above all, to learn to love. There remains so much more to learn. You may know about Auschwitz or Treblinka or Majdanek, but how about Syktyvkar? That's where we and other forced labor, other Jews were perished in forced labor camps in the Soviet Union. 6 million Jews perished in the Shoah, about half in Poland, while 2.5 million died in the Soviet Union in what has often been called the parallel Holocaust. For many years, I had a conflict about being a survivor, not having been in a Nazi death camp or not having lived directly under Nazi occupation. This changed on a visit to the Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, who define survivors as all those who were displaced, persecuted, or discriminated against due to the racial, religious, ethnic, and political policies of the Nazis and their allies between 1933 and 1945. So now I must make up for lost time. My family urged me to create a memento of our survival, so I wrote my story for my 75th birthday, dedicating it to my wonderful grandchildren. And I simply call it the Zaidi story, their grandfather's story, and I will share some of the elements with you now. I was born on November 5th, 1935 in Stoczek Węgrowski, Poland, or Stok, as Jews prefer to call it, a small village about 45 kilometers southeast of Warsaw. Last year, I became the last living Jew from this town after our neighbor, Rachel Posasorsky, passed away in Rishon LeZion, Israel. I was the second child to Yudel Naiman and Sarah Rose Rosenberg. My sister Manya was 7 years older, and this is the only photograph that we have of the two of us, the only photograph of me, actually, because my sister is in another photo. I was named in memory of my maternal grandfather, David Shlomo Rosenberg. He was a sofer, a scribe of holy works like Torah scrolls and other precious parchments. A scribe is one of the noblest callings in Judaism. Imagine having to write a Torah scroll which may take a year to finish. Each scroll will have 245 columns of 42 lines each, a total of 304,805 letters. 3 to 4 perfect letters are scripted per minute, and that may take up to a year to complete. And the letters must be perfect, otherwise that particular scroll cannot be used. My father described him as a wonderful human being who worked tirelessly at his craft, never accepting money for his work. I watched some photos of Kristallnacht and saw the image of Torah scrolls that were burned by the Nazis. Had an outpouring of grief thinking of how my grandfather would have felt seeing such barbarism. Thank God he didn't live to see that. My mother was born in 1904. She was an only child. My mother was born in 1905. He was one of 5. They were married in 1927. My mother was a beautiful woman. I treasure the few photos we have of her when she was young. Sadly, she suffered from serious stomach problems which required complex surgery. She had to be on a strict lifelong diet and medication, yet she somehow endured some incredible setbacks throughout her short life of only 52 years. The only grandparent I knew was my maternal grandmother. She had a small food counter in front of our house from which she sold eggs, cheese, milk, and other staples. Mondays, market days, were busiest when Polish people from various surrounding villages came to trade, sell, barter, or buy products. She traveled every week to Warsaw and always brought back a special treat for us, a cake, an orange, a banana, and was always truly kind to us. Our town had a population of about 1,000 Jews with a similar number of Poles. The days were peaceful with everyone going about their business. Life was simple but difficult. Our home, like most others, was a wooden shack in which we ate, slept, and worked. We had little, but we did not need much. My only possession was a hand-me-down white rocking horse that I rode in front of the house when the weather was nice. My father had no trade or work skills, but was extremely well-read, devouring every Yiddish paper or book that he could find. He was not religious, but my mother and grandmother were very observant. There was a small hospital and a library with books, newspapers brought in from Warsaw. My sister often read to me in Yiddish or Polish. There were various social, political parties which attracted many young people who wanted to break away from the narrower religion-centered life. Most were socialist, left-wing, or in fact, communist. My father joined the left-wing party called Bund. Life went on simply day to day until Hitler invaded Poland on September 1st, 1939. Our town was virtually destroyed a few days later. My father carried me in a duvet, wrapped me in a duvet, and we fled from our town while we could into the nearby forest. And there in the forest, we could see near the horizon the Wehrmacht, the German army moving across on Stoczek, Węgrowski. And when I was trying to find some additional materials for my story, I found this photograph taken by a German soldier of the attack on Stoczek. This is an image that has stayed with me throughout my life. My grandmother heard that the little hospital in our town was on fire, so she decided to go back to see if she could help. And unfortunately, that was the last we heard of her. We had to move on, and we somehow ended up in Białystok, which is about 100 kilometers northeast of our town, near the Belarus border. Białystok was part of Eastern Poland, which the Soviets invaded on September 17th, based on the Hitler-Stalin Treaty. On October 6th, 5 weeks after the invasion, Poland ceased to exist as a country. It was under full control of the Nazi-Soviet alliance. Before the war, Białystok was home to about 50,000 Jews. Now, when we arrived there were about 300,000 crammed into this little enclave, because it was felt that it was safer to be under Nazi occupation than it was safer to be under Soviet control than to be in western part of Poland, which the Nazis controlled. The Soviet dictator, Joseph Stalin, one of the worst mass killers in history, inadvertently saved thousands of Jewish families, including ours. He ordered the deportation of some 250,000 Jews from Soviet-occupied Eastern Poland to forced labor camps deep in the Soviet Union and Siberia. So we were among the deportees, packed into old, filthy cattle cars, and began a journey to an unknown destination. There was no food or water on board. A hole in the floor served as the toilet. The air was foul and unbearable. There were no open windows, and the doors could not be opened from inside. Many days and 2,600 kilometers later, we arrived in Syktyvkar, the capital of the Komi region of the former USSR. It was a so-called autonomous republic, but there was nothing autonomous about it. It was late fall 1939, the onset of our first unbearably cold winter. Syktyvkar, as you may notice from this particular map, is just west of Siberia and just south of the Arctic Circle. This is what the place looked like. And I realized that the native people of the Komi Republic were in many respects similar to the indigenous people of North America, the indigenous people of Canada, for example. And that's what the camp looked like. That's what the barracks and the layout looked like. We were crammed into a small room in one of the barracks with another couple named Mida. A hanging sheet separated us. Wooden planks served as beds, and we shared a Primus burning stove. We would burnt peat or dried cow dung in a metal barrel for heat. The barracks had no sanitation. There were no toilets. We had to use outhouses with holes and wooden planks. And I can assure you then when it's about minus 50 degrees in Syktyvkar, which was very often, it was not a very pleasant experience having to use the outhouse. Life was brutal, especially in winter, which seemed to last 8 months. The barracks had no foundation or insulation. We slept in whatever we wore, huddling together for warmth. We had to be deloused daily. The place was overrun with huge rats, so someone had to stay up at night to fight them off. Diseases were rampant and many died daily. Food was scarce, the only source being ration coupons earned by the workers. And we had to line up for hours to get a little bit of bread, which had more potato in it than wheat. I very often searched through bins for scraps of food or potato peels that were cooked in fat to make them edible, or a weed-like plant called krapiva in Russian, which is perhaps like poison ivy, that was cooked like spinach. The barracks had a long corridor, which became the squatting place for those who did not have a room. One young squatter with whom my father struck up conversation happened to be his nephew, my father's nephew, the son of his brother. And nephew, and Moishe, my father's nephew, my cousin Moishe, joined our family. My father worked a few kilometers away in a building project, and I had to bring him his lunch, which usually consisted of a piece of bread and whatever was available. I had to get through a field packed with snow, very often attacked by wolves or locals. We had one long-term objective: survive today and hope to see tomorrow. The only thing of value that we had were the maroon duvet and several Fragé silverware pieces from my parents' wedding gifts. Fragé was one of the most famous makes in Europe. Moishe traded some of the pieces on the black market for a 22-carat gold coin, 5-ruble gold coin from the Tsarist era. I assure you the coin was much smaller than the image that you may be seeing. However, being found in possession of one of these coins was very, very perilous in the Soviet Union. So the coin was sewn into the garment that I was wearing because it was felt that it was safe from the soldiers who generally would not bother a child. So the coin was a very important element in our survival and led to a wonderful future later on. On June 22nd, 1941, Hitler broke his treaty with Stalin and launched Operation Barbarossa, invading the Soviet Union. It was wartime, brutal and lethal, like no war before or since. Before Hitler invaded Ukraine, Stalin implemented a scorched earth policy to obliterate Ukraine, the breadbasket of Europe and its infrastructure. While millions of Russians and Ukrainians starved to death, there was to be nothing left for the Germans, and that later proved to be a turning point in the war. Many Ukrainians initially welcomed the Germans as their liberators from the yoke of Soviet domination. Many became guards in Nazi death camps and participated with SS Einsatzgruppen in horrible atrocities against Jews. And this became the Holocaust by bullets. No Jews were to remain in the Ukraine. There were over 1,200 sites of mass graves in which 600,000 Jews were murdered. And one of the most notorious was Babi Yar, outside of Kiev, where 34,000 Jewish men, women, and children were shot in front of open pits in a space of 2 days. 34,000 in 2 days. Another horrible place was Mariupol, again in the Ukraine, which is today, or since the invasion of Ukraine by the Soviet Union, has become one of the most devastated cities, where about 200,000 people apparently may have perished, and where a theater was bombed by Russia. Mariupol had an open pit at which many Jewish families were murdered, and this photograph was taken by a Czech photographer showing how they were shot, a bullet at a time. And interestingly, their shoes had to be saved because shoes became more important than Jews. What a horrible, horrible situation. As the Soviet armies pushed the Germans out of Ukraine, there was a great need to start rebuilding the shattered republic. We were shipped from Syktyvkar to a village near Hyveron in Ukraine, again, a distance of about 2,300 kilometers from Syktyvkar. We traveled in similar style to 1939. A nearby family, unlike many Ukrainians, were very kind to us, especially to my mother, often sharing their farm products. As it has been said, no one survived the Holocaust without the help of someone else. My mother would not have survived without the help of the Megillas, a little piece of cheese or some butter or some milk or a piece of chicken. I went to school, which was one big room with several grades in it, and that blue arrow points to my white rabbit fur cap. I was able to identify where I was standing in that school group. It consisted of several classes, but that was unimportant. We learned well. I was, I guess, about 9 years old at that time, and my sister about 16. The radio reports became more positive as the Soviet armies, led by Marshal Zhukov, advanced through Poland and began a push to Germany. The war ended on May 7, 1945, and our next stage of life was to begin. The government declared that any immigrants who did not wish to become Soviet citizens could leave as part of the United Nations Refugee Rehabilitation Association program. We left. So after a trip of about 3,000 kilometers through Czechoslovakia and Austria, we arrived in the Soviet-controlled zone of Lower Silesia, a town in Polish called Wałbrzych or Waldenburg. We were in a little village nearby, which was called in Polish Boża Góra, or God's Mountain. Ironic that it was called God's Mountain, because after nearly 6 years in the Soviet Union, we were there without a trace of Judaism, not a trace of the Sabbath or religious services. The only Soviet religion was communism, and their only God was Stalin. So now we were in God's Mountain, but it was not Mount Sinai. In summer of 1946, we were sent to our next destination, a displaced persons tent city, this time in the US-controlled zone of West Germany. Here we were reunited with my mother's aunt and uncle and their daughters. Conditions here were grim in the summer of that particular year. There was no sanitation or running water. The tents were like ovens, and everyone in our family except me was hospitalized from heat or hypothermia. The next stop was Wetzlar near Frankfurt in the US zone of West Germany. Wetzlar was home of the Ernst Leitz camera factory. Ernst Leitz invented the 35mm camera, which was used extensively by the Nazis to photograph their achievements and to photograph their propaganda. You see the original factory, and then the factory that was rebuilt for their 100th anniversary, which basically looks like a spool of film. Wetzlar was also notorious for its massive SS camp, and that's where we were housed among 4,200 displaced persons or displaced survivors, if you will. Again, here we were reunited with another nephew of my father's and other relatives and folks from our town. And here, for the first time, we began learning of the horrendous atrocities that were committed by the Nazis. We had no knowledge about the Shoah during our time in the Soviet Union. Now photos were circulated of the death camps of Auschwitz, Majdanek, and Treblinka. We met survivors, heard their stories, saw the numbers tattooed on their arms. I held a bar of soap made of Jewish fat, stamped with the Nazi symbol and the letters RJF, which in German stood for Reines Judenfett, pure Jewish fat. Saw lampshades made from skins of Jews. We were horrified to see so many Jews damaged physically and emotionally. They were the survivors, and what we had endured paled by comparison. But we were starting a new life. There were weddings, children were born, schools were opened, and in fact, I went to a Hebrew school called Beit Sefer Tarbut, started learning Hebrew for the first time, and life was reasonably good. We were well treated by the US Army Corps. They provided us with safety and food and whatever else was necessary. A sense of community prevailed. Zionism became rooted among many families, but we began worrying about our future. Those who wanted to go to Palestine, and many did, knew that it would be difficult under the British mandate. The choices were a displaced persons camp in Germany or a detention camp in Cyprus. Even after the declaration of Israel's independence on May 14, 1948, to which we listened in our school. Our teacher told us that that afternoon we would be listening to a special broadcast, and we heard David Ben-Gurion proclaim the independence of the state of Israel. We hereby declare the establishment of a Jewish state in Eretz Israel to be known as the State of Israel. 70 years later, I had the privilege of being in Jerusalem and speaking about that moment. 70 years later, it was one of the most emotional moments of my life. However, the big concern was what's next for us? Where are we going to go? And that was a huge concern because visas to other countries, whether in Europe or North America, were very difficult to get. We tried to get into the US, which proved futile, so the next target was Canada, where unfortunately at one time, none is too many was the immigration policy regarding Jews. Again, Moshe led our efforts. He was the go-getter in the family and had many meetings with Canadian officials. We were told that my sister and I would be welcome, as would Moshe, but my parents would not be because of my mother's ill health. So someone suggested that if Moshe and my sister were married, it might improve our chances. So they obtained a bogus marriage certificate. By the way, they were later married in Canada. They obtained a marriage certificate and hoped that that would help. Not quite. We heard that Canada was accepting a limited quota of tailors to work in Winnipeg in the growing garment industry. So my father had to apply as a tailor, but did not know one end of a needle from another. A cousin who was a master tailor took the test posing as my father. So now, with my father's tailor's credentials and a fake marriage certificate, Moshe again met with the immigration officials, this time with a little gift of the Russian gold coin that had been sewn into my garment. And lo and behold, we got a visa to Canada. So the gold coin led us to this golden land. Later, I learned of the remarkable courage of Ernst Leitz, the inventor of the Leica camera. After Kristallnacht in November 1938, he realized that German Jews would be in peril. He secretly established the Leica Freedom Train, enabling Jews to leave Germany as Leitz employees assigned to foreign offices. This story became known in a book and film as the Leica Freedom Train. Ernst Leitz, like Oskar Schindler and thousands of others, risked their lives to save Jews and are honored as righteous among the nations at Yad Vashem. The trip was scheduled for fall 1948, right after Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, which we thought of not only as a new year, but as a new life. We gathered at the train station and we were sent packing by some of our family. And this time we were in actual passenger cars. So after a train ride to Bremerhaven, one of the ports in northern Germany, we boarded the USS Samuel Davis Sturgis, US wartime passenger vessel. And we set sail on October 8th for Halifax, a journey of about 9 days. Yom Kippur, our Day of Atonement, occurred en route. A synagogue was set up for services. And when we reached the Atlantic Ocean, it was cold and stormy, tossing the Sturgis like a tin can. We were all seasick, and my mother was extremely ill during the entire trip. On Shabbat, October 16th, we landed at Pier 21 in Halifax. I saw George's Island with its famous lighthouse in the port, and for me, it was like the Statue of Liberty, which I had seen in pictures. On November 7th, 2019, I was invited back to Halifax to speak at the Immigration Museum, and that's roughly where we landed when we arrived in Canada. And going through the museum, I came across a few things that I had seen when we arrived. And one was this welcome sign, welcome to Pier 20, welcome to Canada. And what I found interesting is that it was in 7 languages, but not in Yiddish or Hebrew. But I was assured that there was such a sign at the airport, and indeed there is. Also going through the museum, I came across this poster, which I had seen in 1948. This very, very attractive young woman suggesting that we drink Coca-Cola. You see, I thought the sign was Coca-Cola and that the swirl on the L became a T. So I would have liked to drink Coca-Cola, but Coca-Cola cost 5 cents. The problem was we didn't even have 1 cent. But going through the museum, I saw a bottle with a little brown liquid in it, and I had a sip for the first time in my life of Coca-Cola, and that was my first taste of Canada. I was also shown an inscription on one of the walls. I have been blessed well beyond my wildest dreams. I survived the Holocaust with my immediate family and built a new life in an extraordinary country, Canada. Whatever success I have achieved has been inspired and supported by family, friends, and business associates. I was also presented with a photograph of the ship, the USS Samuel Davis Sturgis, and an inscription on it read, "Canada became a better place on October 16, 1948, when the Naaman family arrived at Pier 21 in Halifax." I gave a lot of thought to that statement and thought perhaps there is some truth to it. Perhaps we and the 40,000 other survivors who made Canada their home made it a better place. I then thought of another ship that also sailed from Germany 9 years earlier in 1939, the St. Louis, with 937 Jews on board, trying to flee from the Nazi regime. The ship was refused entry in Halifax as other ports in North America and had to return to Germany, and later most of them perished in the Shoah. And I thought, what would these 937 Jews done to make Canada a better place in fields of medicine, science, technology, the arts? How many future Nobel laureates may have been on that ship? There's, of course, no direct answer, but I can suggest an indirect one. Just think of what the Holocaust survivors and their descendants in Israel contributed to that country and to the world, the rest of the world. I would like to now proceed with a discussion regarding the critical need for Holocaust education. Holocaust awareness around the world is tragically inadequate, and even in Canada, as various surveys indicate. I've felt that there are 6 very critical points in terms of Holocaust education, or these are 5, I guess. Holocaust education is not memorizing that Hitler killed 6 million Jews. It is understanding how one person can start it with words and that words matter. It is understanding how millions of ordinary German citizens were convinced that it was required. It is how countless nations and millions of people were indifferent bystanders. It is learning how to spot the signs of history repeating themselves and doing something to stop it. Among the most critical lessons of the Holocaust and genocides and other major assaults on humanity is a comment that I recently came across, quote, "Beware of the beginning." If early prevention is absent, then the action grows and becomes virtually unstoppable and leads to huge losses of human lives. We did not beware at the beginning when Hitler came to power, or Putin, or Mao, or Pol Pot, or others. The Holocaust remains the clearest warning to all of the danger of anti-Semitism, bigotry, hatred, and racism. I've often been asked, how can one try to process the extermination of 6 million people? It can't be defined as a number. We can't think of it as a number. It's one person at a time annihilated by the Nazis. And here's something to think of. If we held a minute of silence for every Holocaust victim, we would be silent for 11.5 years. Or if we took a second to count from 1 to 6 million, it would take us 47 hours to do so. There have been over 15,000 books published about the Holocaust, and we are still looking for answers. The Holocaust is generally identified as a period between September 1939, when Hitler invaded Poland, and May 1945. However, the seeds were planted many years earlier, beginning with Hitler's book, Mein Kampf, in 1925, in which he clearly identified his virulent anti-Semitism. Then his rise to power in 1933, and his mantra that the world had to be saved from Jews. Again, beware of the beginning. Then passing of the Nuremberg laws in 1935, outlawing relationships between Jews and Germans, and many other horrible, horrible restrictions of businesses, universities, judicial appointments, etc., etc. Then in 1938, Kristallnacht, as well as which was a strategically organized series of pogroms throughout Germany and Austria, which the Nazis used as a trigger of the war. The years 1933 to 41 taught Hitler and his hordes that neither Germans nor foreigners were inclined to interfere with Nazi action. The Shoah was the work of humans acting on familiar human weaknesses: fear, pride, prejudice, greed, ambition. And once underway, it became so entrenched, it was impossible to stop. And the propaganda, the lies replaced the truth, was the lesson that Hitler taught Putin. Holocaust education varies considerably from country to country, as you would expect. Israel has it enshrined in its schools and through visits to the Nazi death camps in Poland. In Canada, it's inconsistent, varying from province to province and school board to school board. I was glad to learn that the Toronto District School Board plans to implement wide-ranging programs. Germany has been in the forefront for many years. High school students there are required to visit the Nazi death camps, and I met and spoke with such a group in Majdanek and found them to be very well informed. Germany has also continued to prosecute Nazi criminals, as we noted in the trial of Oskar Groening. And I'm very happy to note that Germany and Austria have long held that Holocaust denial is a criminal offense, and I am pleased to note that our government is planning to implement that as well. I don't know how it's going to affect those who pursue the First Amendment in the US, for example, freedom of speech, but we'll see what happens. So what can we do to achieve greater Holocaust awareness? We need to find new witnesses. You need to become witnesses, to go where it happened, where the proof is so evident. Meet and hear the testimony of survivors. Learn all you can and teach those around you. 6 million victims of the Shoah no longer have a voice. So it is up to the diminishing universe of survivors, all of you, all of us, to sustain the memories. And this is critical for Jews and non-Jews alike. As Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks, the former chief rabbi of the Commonwealth of Blessed Memory, said, the Holocaust does not define what it is to be a Jew. It defines what it is to be a human. And Pope Francis said so eloquently, Holocaust education is needed to recover our humanity. And attacks on Jews are anti-Semitism, as are attacks on Israel. The Abraham Accords, which were created recently, of mutual recognition and peace between Israel and the Arab Emirates, Sudan, and Morocco, to open the skies and borders between the signing nations, trade and commerce, and hopeful steps towards peace in the Middle East. And for the first time ever, earlier this year, a summit meeting was held in Israel, attended by the US Secretary of State, counterparts of the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Morocco, and Israel. The objective is to develop mutually effective economic benefits despite opposition from various Palestinian and other groups, and resulted in several terrorist attacks which have murdered about a dozen or so Israeli Jews and Israeli Arabs. It is said that over 70 years ago, for 70 years, I should say, the PLO has never missed an opportunity to miss an opportunity. It's still the same now. Now, no education will eradicate the longest lasting hate in history, anti-Semitism, which led to the genocide of all genocides, the Holocaust. But education can prevent its recurrence and must include lessons about other mass killings. And genocide has become a very important element of awareness in the month of April. We have noted that there have been 50 genocides identified by the United Nations and 15 since the Shoah. It's horrible what has happened in slaughter of Armenians in Turkey and in Ukraine, Cambodia, Croatia, Darfur, Uganda, etc. If the world allowed these and other mass killings to happen, it is because the lessons of the Holocaust have not been learned or have been ignored, or simply that the so-called civilized world would rather remain silent. As has been said, if we forget history, it tends to repeat itself. And we see it now in China, where millions of Muslim Uyghurs have been denied freedom of religion and have been sent to massive camps for education and transformation. These are like the ghettos that were among the early stages of the Holocaust. One person managed to escape, Sairagul Sayed Bey. She was granted asylum in Sweden and reported atrocities by Chinese guards akin to what Nazis inflicted on Jews: starvation, torture, rape, electric shock, and medical experiments. We all must learn from history and raise our voice and not be indifferent bystanders, as so many were during the genocides. It has been said the opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference. And a fight of good over evil is easier than a fight of good over indifference. Anne Frank raised her voice through her diary before being killed at the age of 15. Her diary, written in Dutch in 1947, later translated into English and 62 other languages, has served as a vital Holocaust lesson the world over. Now, how about Malala Yousafzai? At age 15, she was shot by the Taliban in Pakistan for daring to raise her voice in a blog about the importance of education for girls. She survived and became the youngest Nobel laureate for her activism. She was also awarded honorary Canadian citizenship. And Nadia Murad, a Zaidi from Iraq. At age 11, she was captured, tortured, and raped by ISIS. She managed to escape and became a noted human rights voice and was awarded a Nobel Peace Prize. I was shocked to learn that Nadia was denied various speaking engagements by the Toronto District School Board because it may lead to some shocking results in the community. I just fail to understand that. And how about Viola Desmond? She raised her voice in New Glasgow, Nova Scotia. She challenged racial segregation by refusing to leave a whites-only area in a movie theater. So a night in the movies ended as a night in prison. She later won her case and led to progressive emancipation of Black communities in Nova Scotia and elsewhere. She also graces our $10 bill. And Professor Erwin Kotler, our former Minister of Justice and current chair of the Raoul Wallenberg Center for Human Rights, a tireless worker for justice and peace and human rights around the world, and I'm proud to be associated with him. Anti-Semitism, the main cause of the Shoah, has reached unprecedented levels the world over, and it's now highest in 40 years. The most brutal example of anti-Semitism was the Holocaust, of course. The scourge may have abated to some extent in the years that followed, but it has not gone away. The sharp rise in recent years reflects the rise of right-wing extremism around the world and the rise of anti-Israel movements such as BDS. These activities peak anytime there's a conflict with Hamas, especially in Gaza, or one-sided United Nations resolutions against Israel. During the past decade, 86% of United Nations resolutions singling out various abuses have been directed at Israel, with 14% against other nations. The newest anti-Semitism is denying Israel's right to exist. Now, Israel has many warts. One may criticize Israel, as I sometimes do. One may criticize any country or any government. That is part of democracy. As Winston Churchill once said, democracy is the worst form of government except for all the others. And it saddens me to see that some people have become the ambassadors of BDS, like Omar Barghouti, the founder of BDS, who said ultimately BDS aims to turn Israel into a pariah, or Lara Kiswani. She was giving a lecture at Berkeley University in California. And she said, bringing down the state of Israel will benefit everyone in the world. Or Ahmed Noor, BDS does mean the end of the Jewish state. Well, I don't quite agree with that. We are living in a parallel universe where repeated lies have become truths for millions worldwide. Lies are the breakfast, lunch, and dinner radicals. Just try to follow the lies that have been spread by Russia in connection with their brutal assault on Ukraine and the war crimes that they continue to perpetrate. We must oppose the rise of racist, ultra-right-wing, and white supremacists everywhere and anywhere. They threaten all of us, Muslims, Jews, people of color, Asians, indigenous nations, LGBTQ, etc. Millions of victims of the Shoah need to be remembered. I was watching a video of some white supremacists parading near Washington. Imagine a father marching at a rally wearing a Camp Auschwitz t-shirt, holding the hand of a child wearing a t-shirt with a swastika emblazoned on it, or other marchers wearing t-shirts showing 6 MWE. 6 million were not enough. What irony. They're the same ones who deny that the Holocaust ever existed. They deny that 6 million Jews perished, yet they can wear proudly a t-shirt that says 6 million were not enough. Fareed Zakaria, a well-known international journalist who happens to be Muslim, wrote that anti-Semitism has spread through the Islamic world like a cancer, and that the Holocaust was called a hoax. Now many imams are speaking out about this. Mohammed Al-Isa, Secretary General of the Mecca-based Muslim World League and former Saudi Justice Minister, said, I urge all Muslims to learn the history of the Shoah, to visit memorials and museums of this horrific event, and to teach its lessons to their children. And how about the Council of Muslims Against Anti-Semitism, which is a Canadian group of Muslim imams who a year ago launched on Yom HaShoah their wonderful, wonderful group to combat anti-Semitism and to ensure that the Holocaust is remembered. And I pray that all these wonderful people of faith are successful. I believe Holocaust education is best achieved through living experiences such as the March of Living. Sadly, COVID-19 prevented me from participating for the 5th and 6th consecutive times. But this morning, I was able to watch a smaller group assembled in Birkenau after the march from Auschwitz to commemorate the Holocaust, and it brought back such compelling, heartbreaking memories. But hopefully next year, I'll be able to march again. The March of the Living for 31 years has served as a model for hundreds of thousands of students with its main lesson, to love, not to hate. And I'm privileged to have been able to surround myself with about 900 special grandchildren who've been with me on the March of the Living. I've often said that the best Holocaust education classroom is Poland, where the most impactful lessons of the Shoah are there. After 1989, when Poland gained independence from the Soviets, many Jewish landmarks have been built or restored. None more compelling than the magnificent Poland Museum and Warsaw Ghetto Memorial. I've been to the Poland Museum many, many times, and I've yet to go through it from one end to the other. What really I found very gratifying is how many tourists visit there to learn of the 1,000-year history of Jews in Poland, and how many Polish families come there with their children. That gives me hope that the future in Poland is going to be much better than it may have been in the past. In our little town, unfortunately, there was not a single trace of Judaism left until one person who survived in our town, the only person to have survived in our town. She was hidden by a Polish family, Kasia Bardi. She emigrated to Palestine and then was able to, She was able to return to Stoczek, and with the help of a Polish activist, was able to compel the city to provide a little plot of land for a little cemetery and one tombstone to commemorate the loss of the people from my little town. After liberation, I learned as much as I could about the Holocaust. I returned to Poland many times. I've become a witness. I read so many books, watched so many films, videos, etc. But nothing prepared me for the emotional impact of being in Auschwitz on my first visit in 2016 and standing under the gate with the obscene phrase, Arbeit macht frei, work will set you free. And if you note the B, the third letter from the left side, is inverted. It's an upside down B. That was done by those who were imprisoned there, the workers, the laborers. They wanted to show the Nazis something that the world would hopefully remember. And going through Birkenau, I've been there 5 times and I still have not been able to grasp the mass of that place. 470 acres, that's like 500 football fields devoted to one thing only, and that's the slaughter of as many people as possible. 1.1 million Jews, Sinti, Roma, witnesses of Jehovah, etc., etc. And the March of the Living commemorates the death marches which were inflicted by those who were about to survive. And I wanted to particularly show this image of the march in 2017. And the white-haired gentleman in the middle with the sunglasses, he is Judge Thomas Walter, a German judge who was the presiding judge at the trial of Oskar Groening, and he was able to get a conviction against Groening, who he died in hospital before he could serve a day of his term. But Judge Thomas felt he had to do that to give back some dignity to the survivors who lost forever in the gas chambers of Auschwitz. I just want to share with you a few glimpses of the March of the Living, where 10,000 and more people from about 40 countries marched to commemorate the death marches from Auschwitz to Poland, just a sea of blue. And then we assemble in Birkenau. Everyone carries a little plaque in which they inscribe perhaps the passing of or the loss of a relative, or never again, or Am Yisrael Chai, or whatever. I carry a little plaque also. It simply says, learn to love. And then we assemble at the closing ceremony at the south end of Birkenau. Again, just a mass of blue. And the survivors from Toronto, there are 9 of us on the last trip, only 4 are in this particular photograph, together with about 50 others from so many countries around the world. We stand tall and proud as we sing the Jewish national anthem, Hatikva, at the biggest Jewish graveyard in the world. And then exactly a week later, we march from the center of Jerusalem to the Kotel, where we recite Hatikva at the holiest Jewish site in the world. Every survivor is asked to speak at a camp, at a site that is meaningful to them. For me, it's Treblinka, where I welcome everyone to my neighborhood death camp. Treblinka was 25 kilometers from our town. In Treblinka, 870,000 of our men, women, and children perished in a period of about 18 months. Unlike Auschwitz or Majdanek, there was no selection at Treblinka. There was no left for life or right for death. It was straight to the gas chambers. And when the Soviet armies were approaching Treblinka, the Nazis decided to destroy all evidence so that people would not recognize what went on there. So about 17,000 memorial stones were erected and ash pits were recreated to remind the world of what went on in Treblinka. I was there in 2016 for the first time with my grandson, Maurice. It was a very emotional experience. There are about 700 stones that represent or memorialize the towns from which Jews were shipped to their death in Treblinka. We found our stone number A91, and I was able to recite various prayers there. I returned there for a second time in 2019. It was a miserable day. It poured all day long, and that's what you should expect in a death camp. But when I finished speaking, an unbelievable miracle occurred. A full rainbow was spread by God over Treblinka, just as happened to Noah after 40 days of rain. So perhaps it was a symbol from God. And when I finish speaking at Treblinka, I always say a silent prayer, thanking God for not turning me into ashes at Treblinka, because that's what I would have been had our family not escaped when we did. And I always point out this particular stone dedicated to Janusz Korczak, Henry Goldschmidt, Ijechi, and the children. He ran a school of orphans, one of the best schools in the world. 180 orphans were in his care. And they were told to assemble at the Umschlagplatz in Warsaw because they were going to be sent somewhere. People who knew Janusz Korczak told him what might happen, and they offered to hide him. He said, "No, I'm going with my children." And all of them perished in Treblinka. Janusz Korczak is the only individual who is commemorated in Treblinka. I wanted to share this with you after Kristallnacht 80th anniversary. We always believe in the miracle of Hanukkah, the festival of lights. Well, the president of Poland met with the chief rabbi of Germany, the president of Poland, rather, of Germany, thank you, Queenie, met with the chief rabbi of Germany to discuss what might they do to commemorate the 80th anniversary of Kristallnacht. And Kristallnacht was particularly symbolized by the Brandenburg Gate, which was one of Hitler's favorite speaking spots. Well, they decided to erect in front of the Brandenburg Gate the biggest Hanukkah menorah in the world. And that brought much needed light over our darkened world for 8 days. I think of that as another miracle, a miracle just like the state of Israel. The Nazis had a final solution, the elimination of every Jew everywhere and anywhere. We have a final solution. It's called never again, means never again. And so long as there is an Israel, there can never be another Holocaust. And had there been an Israel before 1939, there would not have been a Holocaust. I want to finish with another image or two. You may be aware of the decision in Tennessee by a Tennessee school board in McMinn County to remove Maus from their middle class curriculum. Maus, of course, is a cartoon rendition of the Holocaust, Maus being Jews and the cats being the Nazis, because there may have been some offensive images. Well, I've read through Maus after being able to get a copy and waiting months to get one. I found nothing offensive. In the same state, in 1998, a rural school in Whitwell, Tennessee, in a grade 8 class, decided to create what became known as the Paperclip Museum. What they tried to do is process what 6 million means, and I made reference to that earlier. So they decided to find a clip, a paper clip, for every Jewish person who was murdered. 8 million paper clips as a monument for victims of the Holocaust. Queenie and I were there in 2014, I think. And on our way to Florida, we took a detour to Whitwell. And I have to say, I don't know if anyone there had ever met a Jew, but there was a wonderful, wonderful principal who wanted to do something symbolic. They started assembling the paper clips, and soon an industrialist in Germany offered to send them a cattle car similar to the one in which we were shipped from Bialystok to Syktyvkar and from Syktyvkar to Heilbronn, a cattle car in which millions of people were shipped to the death camps. What an incredible, incredible undertaking. And I was particularly taken by a poster that is in front of the cattle car. Children's Holocaust Memorial. Never doubt that a group of thoughtful, committed students can change the world one class at a time. Yes, you and I can change the world one voice at a time. What a wonderful, wonderful, powerful message. You've been exposed to a lot of images, a lot of quotes. I always respected the one from Henry Appel, who was a survivor of Auschwitz. And he said, there's only one thing worse than Auschwitz itself, and that is if the world forgets there was such a place. And I decided to just plagiarize it a tiny bit. And I said, there's only one thing worse than the Holocaust, and that is if the world forgets that it happened. You and I and every person of goodwill in the world must ensure that the world never forgets that the Holocaust happened. Thank you for your kind attention.